Hey guys, and welcome to another week of my 30-day Spanish challenge, going into the detail in this analysis video. So today, as always with these analysis videos, I'm going to be going into the detail of exactly what I did in the last 7 days so you can understand my process, my thinking, and sort of the breakdown of the activities and the skills I've been practicing, so you can really see sort of the fine detail of exactly what I'm doing, so you can understand exactly how I got the results that you would have seen in my vlog or in my diary video. So if you haven't already seen that, I would advise checking that out and then coming back here and watching this one so you can sort of see the behind the scenes and the background of that. So to kick things off then, we're going to be having a look at the timing breakdown. So I always like to look at how many hours I'm having contact with Spanish. And if you've seen a couple of these, you'll know by now when I talk about contact, it's when I'm using the language. So either in my lessons, listening to music, playing video games or something like that. So I count all of that because for me, language learning is all about being positive, because it's quite easy to feel really guilty that you're not doing certain things or that you're not doing enough, or you see other people doing loads of stuff. And I don't want you guys to think that the same way when you see this video, if I tell you how many hours that I've done in total, I don't want you thinking, oh my god, he's doing so many hours and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I have been doing a lot, but I count things like just listening to music. So if I listen to music for an hour, that's an hour that I add onto this list. So it's not just about sort of study time. I'm not spending 8 hours a day studying grammar or doing loads of exercises and stuff like that. And I think that's a really important distinction to remember. Looking at the breakdown then, in total this week I've done just over 32.5 hours in total. So I'm really happy with that, and as you'll notice from the graph here, that most days I managed to do quite well. There were a couple of days that were a lot lower, and one of them was really, really low. I think I must have missed my lesson that day because of how much work I needed to do. But overall, I'm really happy that most of the other days are really high on that list. And I think that's the important thing for me, is always about doing a little bit every day. So when I see sort of the graph like this, it's really nice to sort of remind myself, okay, I am doing a fair amount every day. And obviously a lot of that is playing video games, listening to music, stuff like that. So it's all that extensive stuff. And so that's, I think, a really important distinction as well, that when you see all of these number of hours on the different days and stuff like that, I'm not having that many lessons. And so I don't want you thinking that I'm doing maybe 8 hours of lessons or something like that, because to be honest, I don't even know if I could do that. Maybe that's a challenge for in the future, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But overall, my goal really is to just do stuff in the language I'm studying every day. So at this moment, it's Spanish. And so basically, at the moment, I'm kind of studying Spanish, Japanese, and Italian. But Japanese and Italian are really on the back burner. So apart from any passive activities or normal things I do every day, like reading some web novels in Italian, I'm not doing anything at the moment because it's just too much. I can't focus my brain entirely on Spanish and then also find loads of time to study Japanese. And when I'm doing this kind of intense challenge, I think I really need to just use my limited time wisely, because obviously when you see all these numbers as well, they're also while I've been working. So there's obviously that time and then sleep and work and the other stuff. So there's really not a lot of other time. Basically, whenever I've not been working, sleeping, or doing other necessary things, I've probably been doing something in Spanish. And that really, I think, is part of the reason why I'm making progress quite quickly, as well as the repetition, because the more I'm repeating stuff and the more I'm doing every day, that's having a really strong impact on how quickly my level's improving and how quickly I'm reinforcing that new vocabulary that I understand passively and making it active. And that's the real difference I've noticed this week, is because of that, when I'm learning a word in a lesson, then I'll watch a video and I'll hear that same word, and then it's a lot easier to then use it in the next lesson, and then I'm automatically, after a couple of days, assimilating and really using all of that vocabulary. So when I learnt the simple past, which was quite tricky, although now I still have to kind of go through the conjugation table in my head, I understand all the structures and I'm able to use it in my lessons relatively easily and relatively error-free. There's always some mistakes, but after maybe 2 or 3 days. And I think that's really important, is that's not something I would normally be able to do. So this challenge of doing all of these lessons is something that's really allowed me that sort of ability to really take in and use that grammar straight away and use it much more naturally than I would normally if the number of hours speaking was a lot less. So I think that's definitely something to take away from doing this kind of challenge. Okay, so now it's time to have a look at the different skills breakdown. So when I talk about the skills, I'm always talking about, the big four: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And I'm really glad I managed to remember all four of them then. When you're on the spot, sometimes it's easy to forget. But I'm always talking about those. And if you remember, my goal for this challenge is really about getting speaking fluency and feeling confident speaking at least in a simple way in Spanish. So writing is not even on the list. And as you'll see from the graph here, it's really showing that this week's been really interesting because it was kind of like a third split for all of the different skills of speaking, listening, and reading. And so then speaking is all my lessons. So you'll see a third of everything I did this week was just lessons. And then the reading is my video games, because there's not enough audio really for it to count as listening. And then listening is obviously YouTube videos and music. So it was really interesting to see that mix, because I've been trying to keep the sort of intense activities as big as possible. But what I've noticed is my overall time isn't actually reducing. What's happening is I'm actually just doing more of the other stuff, which makes the proportion lower. So the quality is actually better. So I've kind of had to rethink how I'm looking at it and think about that it's not necessarily about getting that speaking proportion as high as possible, as long as the quantity is still really good. So if you think I did about, 32 and a half hours or something like that, and a third of that is speaking and is lessons, that's about 10 hours in a week. So really, 10 hours is amazing. I'm really pleased with that amount of hours. And so the other stuff, like being able to do probably that amount of playing video games, if I think about it that way, that's extra exposure that I wouldn't have if I was doing other things. And the same with the music. And that's really what that sort of extensive stuff is for me, that it's not necessarily about learning loads of words. I notice a few things and it does help reinforce some stuff, especially when I'm learning grammar. I can notice different tenses that I wouldn't be able to understand before. So that's a really important thing. But really, it's just about having that extra contact and extra use of the language that I wouldn't normally have if I didn't do those things naturally. Because if I spent all of my day just watching films in English, then my time using Spanish would be a lot less. And so then I would think I would pick things up a lot slower. So that for me is just really, I like to sort of create my own sort of mini immersion system. And that's basically just by doing everything I can as often as I can in the language that I'm studying. And I noticed when I was talking to one of my Italian friends, I tried to send him a voice memo on WhatsApp. And because my brain is just so fixed in Spanish at the moment, I found it really difficult. Although my Italian is I'm really good, I'm really happy with my level in Italian, it was really difficult even just to send a basic message, because the Spanish was just coming to my mind much easier. And that's something I noticed, that when I'm in this kind of immersion process, even when my level is a lot lower, the words from that language tend to come to my mind much quicker. And that's really part of the whole thing. So the same when I was doing the same with Japanese, my level is super basic, but a lot of those words were coming easier. So when I did have an Italian conversation with someone, I kept saying arigato instead of grazie or something like that. And those little things, those sort of natural reflexes, are something that really makes a big difference when you're going through this kind of process. And so that's something I really want to keep doing, is just keeping that sort of immersion as sort of heavy and as constant as possible while I'm doing this kind of challenge. Okay, so my final thoughts of this week then. I'm really happy actually. I managed to find at the end of this week, I managed to find a new teacher, and that I think is really going to make a huge difference, because this teacher works exactly as I like to work. And so I'm really interested to see if I now go from having lots of different lessons with lots of different teachers, whether the quality of those hours is going to increase. And I know next week actually I've got a really busy week coming up, so the number of hours I'm going to get in terms of my lessons is going to be much, much lower. I'll probably get a lot more passive stuff done, so it's probably not going to affect the overall total, but the intensive stuff, the lessons, is going to be a lot less, because I just don't have the time to fit it all in. So it's going to be really interesting to see that even with that lower quantity, whether the quality of the lessons is going to be better, because I found one teacher and I think I've already booked the next few days just with this one guy. So I'm interested to see how that goes. But overall, I think I'm picking up grammar and stuff quite well, and I really want to just try and carry on with that, and also now start sort of reinforcing what I'm already learning, because I've only got a week left, so if I just hammer grammar now, that's not actually going to improve sort of my speaking confidence or fluency. So I want to be making sure that I'm just sort of having lots of conversations and dropping a few extra little structures and grammar and stuff like that in there to help me kind of carry on. And I'm really, really eager to try and tackle the subjunctive, because it's something that I really hate and I'm terrified of in Italian, and I still can't get my head around it completely. It's just that tricky, and so I really want to do the same in Spanish, just to sort of see what the differences are, or whether it helps me reinforce my Italian, because I've noticed with a lot of this stuff that when I'm learning it in Spanish, it actually gives me sort of like inspirations or illumination for the Italian, and makes me actually understand the Italian better. So I think having that connection is really helping me pick some of this stuff up quite easily, because if you think about it, it's the idea that if you're learning, when I was learning German, I needed to learn all of the cases, because in school we never learned cases, because I don't know, maybe they decided that I was too stupid for that. But so I had to spend probably 2 weeks when I was learning German just trying to understand what the cases meant, exactly how they worked, what the definitions were, because I'd never really even understood that type of grammar before. And so it's kind of the same in Spanish, but the other way, that because I've understood a lot of those structures and I've got those structures built in my mind, it means that I don't have to build that framework to then apply the language to. So stuff like conjugations of verbs and the subjunctive and certain things like that, I kind of already understand those ideas, and so I can actually just learn the structure and the words and the kind of the use, and I don't have to sort of understand, okay, why do we use the subjunctive, and build this whole kind of architecture in my mind of how the idea works, which is what I have to do a lot in, say, Japanese, where the structure and the use is just so different. I have to spend time actually just trying to understand the context before I can apply the language. So that's something I'm really interested to see, maybe how that goes with the subjunctive and the other stuff that I'm going to learn in the next week. So I really hope you've enjoyed this analysis. I know it's a little bit nerdy and it's probably quite intense, but I want to really show you, you know, how I do it. And all of this that I'm doing is something that I do whenever I'm studying languages, just to keep positive. Because like I said, if I see a number that says 30 something hours in a week, that makes me feel really good about what I've done. Whereas if I only look back and I think, oh, well, I had a couple of hours of lessons and maybe I did a little bit. If you're anything like me, you always start to diminish everything that you're doing, and you start sort of discounting things, going, oh, well, music doesn't count, or that TV doesn't count, or YouTube doesn't count because I wasn't reading the subtitles, or I didn't understand every word. And for me, I like to do the opposite and really force myself to look at everything and say, do you know what? Yes, I was watching YouTube with no subtitles, but I heard a couple of words from my lessons that I understood, and I really enjoyed doing that, and I can follow the basic idea. And I think that sort of thing, for me, keeping positive is really helping me stay motivated, because to be perfectly honest, this challenge is really intense, as you can probably imagine. And so I'm really noticing that I'm getting really tired now. And it's not as quick as it was in the beginning, because the concepts are getting more difficult. I'm trying to do lots of new stuff. And with work as well, it's not easy to do this kind of intense challenge. And so I really need to make sure that my motivation and my desire to keep going is high, because otherwise I just won't make it to the end of the challenge. So yeah, that's basically my plan for the next week. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Consider giving it a like and maybe sharing it with some of your language friends. And I look forward to seeing you next week to show you the end of my 30-day Spanish challenge. Hasta luego.